In this video, I'm making a sheath for the XCAL fighter. So right now, we can actually scratch things and we don't have to be super delicate. But later on, everything will have a super fine finish on it, and as we make the sheath, we would have to be very careful not to scratch anything. So it's a good time to stop, make the sheath, and then finish out all the components of the knife. First thing I like to start with is make a template of the sheath so we can cut out all of our leather components.
I like to make the patterns for my sheaths out of a file folder. There's a little bit more structure and stiffness than something like a piece of paper. Sheath making pretty much boils down to 4 things: laying things out, cutting leather, gluing things together, and stitching.
I've got the front and back of the sheath and the belt loop cut out, as well as the shark skin that's gonna cover all the pieces. Now I'm gonna use contact cement to permanently stick these pieces together.
I skive a taper on both ends of the belt loop to make it look a little bit better when it's all sewed together onto the sheath. Without the taper, it can look a little boxy and chunky, but the taper helps streamline it a bit.
We got the front and the back of the sheath here, looking really nice. I trimmed up the edges a little bit around the shark skin. This is the belt loop, and this is gonna be the little strap that'll hold the knife in place. The next thing I wanna do is clean up these edges on a few of these parts, because we're gonna start putting these parts together, and it'll be much easier to clean up these edges and get them smooth now before they're assembled.
I used the Broadbeck with a really worn out 320 grit belt on it. This will help me burnish the edges and make them really smooth. I also wet down the edges of the leather, and I put a little bit of water on the belt as well. Without the water, it's much harder to get the fibers to lay down and for the edge to become smooth. We want to smooth those edges on the belt loop and on the little strap right now, because it'll be much harder to get to those later on after they're sewed to the rest of the sheath. I finish out my burnishing process using a little gum trag and a piece of deer antler, manually rubbing on the edges of the leather.
That's it for the end. That should be nice and burnished, super smooth looking. I wanna talk about this product real quick, where you get this really cool leather. So you can only get this at Springfield Leather Company. This is their patented cow shark. They have figured out a way to breed cows and sharks together to produce this amazing piece of leather. On one side, it's cowhide, nice, smooth, beautiful, fine texture. On the other side, it's shark skin with kind of an aggressive, bumpy texture. Look at this, absolutely beautiful. You can see that this is definitely one piece, because right here, look at that, definitely one piece. It's not 2 different pieces put together. This is indeed from a cow shark.
Do you want to level up your knife making? Now's a great time to consider our premium courses, because they're 40% off. If you want to make a high-end Mastersmith quality takedown Bowie knife, then check out the Takedown Bowie online course. If you're just getting started and you want to shave years off your learning curve, then check out the Beginner Bladesmith online course. You get lifetime access, so you can come back to the courses and watch whenever you want, as many times as you need. We know you'll like it, and that's why we're offering a 14-day money-back guarantee. Links for both of these courses will be in the description, so join now before the sale ends April 22nd. It's time to attach the belt loop to the back of the sheath. Anywhere the leather isn't rough, I use the Dremel tool to rough up the leather, so we'll get a much better bond between the contact cement and the other piece that has contact cement.
It can take a while before the contact cement is ready to go. So if you're really waiting around on something you gotta get going, you can just use a hairdryer and cut minutes off of the wait time. Go ahead and stick this on here. I've got some layout lines to kind of help me locate where it goes. I think we'll put it right there. And then we want to apply a little contact, hence the contact cement part. I find tapping on it with a hammer really helps seat the 2 sides and really make them stick well together.
After contact cementing the belt loop in place, I begin laying out where the stitches will go through the belt loop, the strap, and the back of the sheath. Using a stitch marker allows me to perfectly space each stitch so they look nice and consistent with each other. I then use a Dremel tool set up on a small drill press stand to drill tiny holes for the stitches. On the inside of the sheath, I use a small grooving tool to remove a little bit of material where the stitches sit. That way the stitching sits below the surface of the leather and the knife doesn't scrape on it when it's going in and out of the sheath. Let's move our attention to the front of the sheath. We need to locate and install a frog on the sheath. This will give the little pouch for the takedown tool we're going to make later something to hang on, and it'll also give the strap that holds the knife in the sheath something to hook onto. I cut a relief on the inside of the sheath so that the metal that'll be in there will sit below the surface of the leather a little bit. Just to make sure that metal never scrapes on the knife, I put a little leather patch over the metal. Once again, I use the Dremel tool to rough up the leather. We're about to install the welt around the perimeter of the sheath.
Got all the welt put together, and right now I have the front of the sheath temporarily clamped on with the welt and back assembly. I like to use these office clamps to hold everything in place and get a feel for how well the knife's fitting. And right now I'm very happy with it. We're gonna glue the front of the sheath on. We're gonna glue the front of the sheath on. We're gonna glue the front of the sheath on. We're gonna glue the front of the sheath. I'm gonna glue the front of the sheath on, and then we can start the process of laying out the stitches and doing the sewing and drilling holes and all that stuff.
Now that the back, the welt, and the front have all been contact cemented together, we can start laying out our stitches that go through the main body of the sheath. I use a grooving tool to make a little line I can follow with the stitch marker to get the perfect spacing, and then the Dremel tool to drill the holes. I use slightly larger holes this time than we did with the belt loop because I'm going to use a slightly thicker string, and I need a little bit larger holes to accommodate that thicker string. Once the holes are drilled, I go back over it with the stitch marker because it kind of cleans the holes up and makes them look a little nicer and makes it so the string will seat a little better.
I'm working on stitching up this sheath. I want both sides of the sheath to have stitches all along every hole. I start with this really tough string. I'm not sure what it's made out of, but it's wax coated. It has 5 strands, but it's a little too thick for what I want. So I actually had Josh help me peel apart the string into a 2-strand section and a 3-strand section. I use the 2-strand sections for smaller, more delicate stitching, like what we did around the belt loop here. And then for the main sheath, I'm using 3 strands worth of the string. My process for stitching each hole is to first have the string go through a hole and have equal amounts in the middle. I've got equal amounts of string, and then we've got a sewing needle on each end of the string. And then I just go in the next hole with one needle, and then I take that same needle and go through the next hole back. I find going 2 holes at a time is a nice balance between a speedy stitch that doesn't take too long and being able to pull it all tight as I go. So once that's done, we take the other needle and we just go through the next 2 holes as well. And that'll give stitching on both sides of the sheath. Pull through there. Pull it. I pull it really hard to get it nice and tight and cinch everything down, and then move on. That's the whole process. We do that until we get all the way to the end. So I just finished up the final stitch here. We're on the last hole. We've got the entire perimeter done. I want to show you how I tie up my string and finish everything off here. So we finished at the last hole. We've got 1 string coming out of each side of that same hole. And what I like to do is I like to take the string that's coming out the back of the sheath and I run it backwards 1 hole. We're gonna pull it through there. Let me make sure this was nice and tight before we start all that, okay? Pull that through. Sometimes you need pliers because it's starting to get tight in there now that we have multiple pieces of string going through that little hole. So now we've got 2 layers of string on that side only. So once again, I wanna make sure everything's kind of tight. At this point, I go ahead and tie it off and just do a regular knot. Nothing fancy about it at all, except for it moving all over the place. And then to get rid of that knot, what I do is run both strings through that last hole. And then from the other side, we will pull that knot into the hole. The string kind of moves around a little bit and we'll be able to just pull it right into that hole and it'll disappear. And you'll also have a lot of tension from that hole in there holding everything in place. So we pull that first string through, we're gonna pull the other one through. It's getting really tight now. I've got both strings through the hole. I'm now going to pull that knot until it just barely starts to disappear in that hole. And that's it. Now we can snip the string off the other side. I like to just use a pair of wire cutters. I can get it nice and close to the leather. One of the final steps in stitching is to go back over the stitching with the stitch marker, and it'll help all the threads lay down flatter and just make them look way nicer. This is my favorite part of making a sheath, is actually this final bit of stitch marker rolling, because it just lays those threads out and they look so much nicer, so much cleaner, kind of flattens the string out and makes it look wide and makes all the holes look really even. Kind of makes the string pop a little bit more too. I'm working on a little pouch for the takedown tool. We've got our takedown tool here and I want something it can sit in. It'll probably sit inside the pouch about right there. And then we need a little bit of room because I'm planning on hooking it onto the frog of the sheath right here and it'll sit right on the front. I thought a little radius on the top and bottom of this pouch would look nice. So in order to lay that out properly, I used a lid right here. If you're following along at home and you want to get the exact same radius on your part, you're going to specifically need orange seal, regular sealant, injection system. If you get a different size bottle or a different brand, it may not work for you though, because it might have a different size lid. I could easily lay it on the part, center it up, and draw around it to get a nice radius that matches on both ends. If you're wanting to get some of this sealant for yourself, you can check the link in the description. That way you'll have the perfect radius template for making your own pouch at home and it looking just like mine in the end.
This little pouch is going to be made out of 4 pieces of leather. The stiff piece, that's kind of the back frame of it, is going to be cowhide. And we're going to have a thin piece of goat skin on there to clean up the front side of it. And then the little pouch area needs to be kind of flexible. So that's just going to be a layer of goat skin with a layer of shark over the front of it. The little pouch for the takedown tool is done. It's time for a fit up to see how everything looks together.
I'm at the Broadbeck with a pretty fresh 120 grit belt. I'm gonna clean up all these edges, get everything nice and even, and then I'm also going to dome the edges a little bit because that makes the sheath look a little skinnier and streamlined instead of chunky like a 2x4. We're also going to switch over to a really worn out 320 grit belt, and I'm gonna get the belt wet, and I'm gonna get the edges of the leather wet, and we're gonna burnish everything down so it's as smooth as we can get it before we go over to hand burnish the edges.
Because we just got the edges wet, we need to let everything dry, and then we'll be able to put our final leather finish on the sheath and the little pouch.
I let both of our leather parts dry overnight, and by the way, Dad's forging a massive knife right now, so he's got the forge running over there in the background. We wanted to make sure these parts are nice and dry before we start putting the finish coat on. The edges got very wet when I was burnishing them, so that's why we wanted to make sure they dried overnight in front of some moving air. For the finish coat, I'm gonna use Sheen, and I'm gonna spray it on with my airbrush. I'll probably do about 2 coats, but after the first coat, it'll look about as good as it's gonna look. The second coat's just to add a little bit more thickness to it. I like to put it on pretty thin, stick it in the airbrush, and hose it all down. Got the finish on the sheath. It added just a nice little bit of shine to all the leather. The shark looks absolutely amazing. We can get the rest of the knife finished out now and don't have to worry about scratching things as I make the sheath with the finished knife. I will see you in the next video, which will be the last video in this series. We're gonna get this knife finished. May the forge be with you. Bye-bye.
If you want to learn more about our online courses, check out the link in the description.